So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is the third chance that I've had to speak here in this hall, and I thank the Monsignor, and Joachim has been involved in each one of those three. Unfortunately, my slides are pretty much the same, all three presentations, but you've conveniently rotated the audience each time, so it works out okay. So I'm going to talk about why we have, what are the underlying causes for the poor diets. And I'm going to talk mostly about undernutrition because that's what I know most. I think that Bruce will talk a lot about what's going on with the overnutrition, so I won't concentrate on that. So I want to talk about what's been happening in agriculture, what's been happening to food prices over the last 50 years. So if you see this diagram here, you see that dashed red line is 100% increase between 1965 and 1999, a doubling. That blue bar is the developing country population. It doubled. And back in the 60s, people were worried that we wouldn't have enough food. There would be a lot of widespread famine because they knew that population growth was coming. So we had what was called the Green Revolution. We raised the yields of rice and wheat and maize. And those orange bars there show the success of that effort. Cereal production more than doubled during that period. But I want to draw your attention to the green bars. That's pulse production. Pulse production increased only by 25%. It increased, but it didn't keep pace with population growth. Now, that's only a marker for vegetables, fruits, animal products. If I'd put the bars in for those groups, you'd see the same kind of pattern. So what happens to food prices, that kind of pattern? So these are some data for India, and you can see that the rice, this is cereal prices, rice and wheat prices in India. You can see that they started at an index of 140 in the early 70s, and because of the Green Revolution, the huge supply increases, you can see the prices fell by 40%. Now, they've started to come back up again recently, but they're still just as low as they were in the 1970s. But the main point of this, though, is to look what happened to all the non-staple food groups. And you can see that those prices have doubled and tripled over the same period. So what are the parts of the diets that are most dense in minerals and vitamins? You should be getting your minerals and vitamins from these non-staple food groups: pulses, vegetables, fruits, eggs, meat, and fish. So it's becoming more and more difficult. If your income hasn't increased over that period, it's fine, you can keep from going hungry because the price of rice and wheat have stayed low. But if you want to get dietary quality, it becomes more and more difficult over time. And I think this is the primary underlying cause of why the mineral and vitamin deficiencies are so persistent. Now, these are some data for Africa, and actually Lawrence showed these data earlier, and it just shows that also in Ethiopia, all the non-staple food groups are to the right. They've been increasing, and the cereals and oils and fats and sugar and honey are the ones that have either stayed constant or have declined. It's the same sort of pressures are happening in agriculture in Africa as happen in Asia. So this is a typical pattern of diets. When I look at diets all over the world in developing countries, these are data for Kenya, but it happens, as I say, I've seen these patterns also in Asia. So you see the data run from lower income on the left to higher income on the right. The people at lower income might have an income of $100 per capita. The people on the far right might have $500 income per capita. And you can see that the food staple consumption basically remains constant across income groups. So the first thing poor people do is they buy food staples to keep from going hungry. And then what do they do at the margin as their income increases? Well, you look at the non-staple plant foods, you see that the consumption goes up. And then you look at the fish and animal foods, and you can see that the consumption goes up. So that's what people want to do. As their income goes up, they want to have more diverse diets, and they do. They go and they buy those products. But even at that higher income level, $500 per capita, this happens to be calorie intake. But if you convert that to vitamin A intake or iron intake or zinc intake, even those people at higher income levels are still deficient in the vitamins and minerals they need. And it's partly because the prices of those food groups are going up and up and up over time. So I want to try to go through how do people reallocate their food budgets as food prices go up. So this is pretty typical of how low-income people spend their budgets in developing countries. So about a third of their income goes for non-food, and 2/3 of their income goes for food. A third of it is for the staple foods, and a third of it is for the non-staple foods, so about equally divided between non-staple plant foods and fish and animal products. Now what happens if you simulate a 50% increase in all food prices? How are the people going to react? How are they going to change their diet? What are they going to do? What are they going to keep and what are they going to give up? So what they do is, the most basic thing they need to do is to keep eating enough calories so that you don't want to go hungry. No matter what, you don't want to go hungry. That's the most basic human instinct. So you continue to consume nearly the same amount of rice and wheat, whatever the food staple happens to be, but that takes up more of your diet, of your food budget. And so you have to cut back in other areas. So you cut back on your non-staple foods, and you also even cut back on your non-food expenditures. So the women on the right-hand side have an iron intake 1/3 lower than the women on the left. And the women on the left are already iron deficient. There's already a lot of iron deficiency. So that's what happens if your income remains constant and as these price increases happen over a long term. There's a very nice study that was done in Indonesia. It was kind of a tragic situation. You had the economic crisis in Indonesia. And I don't know if you can see all the numbers, but all the prices in all those food groups doubled during a period of just about 1.5 years during the food crisis. And they were able to take readings on the iron status of children during that period. And exactly what I just described happened in Indonesia. People had to give up their dietary quality, and when they measured the blood hemoglobin, the measure of iron status during the period of the economic crisis, it went down and down and down because dietary quality got worse. And then when the crisis eased, it went back up, but it didn't get back, at least in this time period, it didn't get back to the levels they were originally. So the general solution, this is at a very aggregate level, at a very general level. If the rectangle on the left is your entire nutrient requirements, agriculture is presently providing, it's the green area, it's providing some of the nutrients that we need to be fully healthy. And the nutrition community has come in with supplementation and fortification to make up the gap. And of course, there's always some unreached populations. And what we need to do in the future is to make sure that agricultural policies and agricultural investments provide a higher proportion of the total minerals and vitamins that people need. That green area has to go up. You're always going to need supplementation and fortification, but hopefully not as much as presently. Providing the minerals and vitamins in the food supply is much cheaper and it's much more sustainable than having interventions such as supplementation and fortification. And of course, we want that area of the unreached populations to be as small as possible. Now, let's talk a little bit about overnutrition. So you have that situation you have that situation both for rural and urban populations, but over time the populations are becoming more and more urban. So the lifestyles in the urban areas are more sedentary. More people eat meals outside the house. They don't prepare their own meals. And then, as has been discussed earlier today, there are new lines of processed foods that are very energy dense. The food companies provide them to consumers at a price that are attractive even to low and middle income consumers. They advertise them. They tend not to be very dense in minerals and vitamins. So this is an additional thing that is being added to the decision-making process of the households on what foods to buy. And so it's particularly acute more in urban areas than in urban areas. So these processed foods contain high levels of sugar, saturated and trans fats, and sodium. And as has already been discussed, there's a much higher level of sugar-sweetened beverages. So the net effect, especially in urban areas, is that is increasing obesity. So these next two slides are just some data to show that the fact of increasing consumption. The data on the right, the blue bars are for high-income countries. They're the rate of increase of ultra-processed foods and beverages. That's the green line. Processed foods is the red line, and then the green line is the sweetened beverages. And you can see that the growth rate has leveled off, but the absolute level is very high. But you can see the rates of increase in the middle column. You can see that the middle income countries, the rates are going up over time. And then in the low income countries, they're starting to increase. They'll transition to the middle bar, and then they'll finally reach the high income bar. So some of the policies to reverse the rise in obesity, and this will be taken up in much more detail later, are consumer education, including labeling, taxation of unhealthy foods, and then restricting access, for example, in schools. So thank you very much.